Hi, guys. Welcome again for another study in the Word in 10 and just taking topics and in 10 minutes or so, just to give an overview of what they are. And today, I want to take a look at the fact that we are invited by God to work alongside Him. Remember when I was younger, my dad used to ask me to come in the yard and just help him with things, or maybe down in the basement, he's working on something or whatever. And he'd say, come on. And I'd work alongside him. And I didn't do such a hot job. But the thing was, he said, good job, good job. And then, we'd go and get something, he'd buy me something. Same thing with girls, when you're growing up and mom invites you to come into the kitchen and to bake and maybe make cookies. And of course, your cookies didn't quite turn out the way mom's does. And you were looking at that and you were so grateful that you're with mom, you're working with her, you're baking cookies. And she always told you how good that came out. And even though she had to be really honest, would have hurt our feelings. But in some sense, that's like grace. And that's how it is when we're called to work alongside with God. The call is an invitation. Sometimes we can look at the call and we make more out of it than what it is. God is actually inviting us to come and walk with him. The parable of the wedding, where the invitations and the servants were told to go out in the highways and the hedges and compel or urge them to come in so that my house may be filled. It's an invitation to come and sit and eat with the king. Well, here, when Jesus first started ministry, he said, come, follow me. I'll make you fishers of men. And we would go fishing for people, is what he was saying. Well, that was an invitation to come alongside Jesus into his ministry. And the Great Commission also is an invitation to come and work with God. And in fact, in evangelism, just having the message of Christ going out from us, that is an invitation to the world to come and be a part of God's family and be a part of what God's doing in the world. And this is something that God had predetermined. And God, who is not subject to time and space, so before time and space existed, God prepared a work for every human being to do. And then we're invited to come in what he's prepared for us to go alongside of him. And also in the book of Acts in chapter 2, when the day of Pentecost came and the Spirit of God was poured out, and about 3,000 were saved. In one day, 3,000 were saved. And that's because the disciples were simply working with God. They had been trained by Jesus that they're invited into this, and the Holy Spirit will lead the way. And that's why they were told to wait until the Holy Spirit comes. And he actually operates the works that we're called to do through him, through us. So actually what's happening here is we are co-laborers with God. And that's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, that we are God's field, but we are also God's co-workers. 1 Corinthians 3:9. So we are invited not only to a new life, we are invited to his family, God's own family. We are invited in his work of world redemption to take a part of that. And just like the analogy when we were younger helping our parents, they invited us to come and do something and do some chores. And back then you were invited to do that and you didn't see them as chores. Then as we got older, we're like, oh, work, but back then we were excited to be working with mom. We were excited to be working with dad, whatever it is, whether it was baking or whether it was outside cleaning the car, we were excited. Well, this is what God is all about. This is what it was about in the Garden of Eden, where Adam was created and Adam was invited to work alongside with God. And he gave names to all the animals and he tilled the soil. He cared for the garden. And this was all the works of God, but it wasn't the works With God, it was the relationship. Just like the parent to the children. You want to come out and wash the car, as my father would say, it was the father to the son just to spend some time together. And the same thing with the mother and the daughter saying, come, just bake some cookies. What's she doing? It was the experience. It was the relationship. Well, it's no different. When God invites you and I into the family, it's about a relationship. He wants us to relate to him as Father. And by the righteousness of Christ, we are given that privilege. So everything we do is because of what Jesus had already done. So we could respond freely. And you don't have to say, oh, I'm just not that good at doing that. You don't even have to worry about that because God's not going to critique that. What he's going to do is invite you to a place where your gifts and strengths that he gave to you before you were ever born, he designed you for it. He already knows that when he reveals to you what he wants you to do, you're going to be excited about it. And that's the whole thing of ministry, the joy of working together with God. But he's doing it as a co-laborer with him because of the relationship. So to be invited by God to work with him, it's to have this fellowship with him, to think along with him, to strategize with him, to hear his plans. Ministry, when I was younger in the Lord, the way it was taught, sometimes you thought it was a mystery. You had to seek God and fast and pray and call out to God. I heard it taught many times. You cry out to God and until finally you have this breakthrough and he shows you what you're called to do. And the interesting thing is, I never had that. I used to pray a lot when I was younger and call on God for a lot of things. But the call of God on my life actually came to me out of times of fellowship. So fellowshipping with him, I was invited to do what I've been doing. And pastoring a church, I was invited. That was the call. I was called to pastor a church and to plant the church. But that was an invitation to do what God was doing on Staten Island at the time. This is what he wanted to do. And also later on in life, in more recent years, some years ago, about 5 years ago, actually about 6 years ago, God started to stir my heart again. And it was an invitation to do something new outside the church. So I'd be doing two things. And this one was about developing leaders outside the church and in coaching and helping business leaders and CEOs with their teams, their staffs. And what I'm doing is simply coaching them. Well, God prepared me to do that in 2013, 2014, and then 2015. And what it was an invitation to come and bless people outside the church that maybe are not believers. Now, the church is called to bless the cities outside the church walls. So either way, we're called to bless society. And I was invited by God, another call after so many years, 24 years of ministry in this church, I was called to this invitation of blessing business leaders, blessing their teams, all over Staten Island, Brooklyn, in parts of New Jersey, just to bless people. This is what the ministry is all about. It's an invitation to come and redeem. And why? Because when Adam and Eve were invited to work with them, they were distracted and listened to the devil. They listened to the serpent. And they did what God told them not to do. He said, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's like a type of the law, because the law gives you the knowledge of good and evil. It can never justify you. It can't forgive you. So God invited them to eat from the tree of life, but instead they chose to eat from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they were banished from the garden and never again allowed to eat from the tree of life. Interesting, Jesus comes and it says that he was hanged on a tree. Again, the type. And out of that, we were brought to life. In fact, the book of Revelation says that those who overcome, he will give this privilege of eating from the tree of life. So it's a do-over. So we have a foretaste of that. We eat of the tree of life by accepting God's invitation. So ministry comes to you. It's not our work, it's his works. The grace of God with you produces the works by faith. Believe in the invitation God has given you. Don't be frightened of it. Be excited about it, because he's going to be in there with you. The Holy Spirit, who never leaves you or forsakes you, is leading you and guiding you and bringing to remembrance all things you've ever been taught. And when you are invited by God to do something, don't shrink back. Get excited. It's not about judging our works. It's about the relationship. You get to develop a working relationship with God and get special insight into what your gifts and talents are, how God designed you to be used to bless society. So I hope that helps you a little bit, and to understand the fact that ministry is not a mystery. It's an invitation by God to bless society. He's inviting you to come alongside him and do what he's doing, just like Jesus said he was doing. So until next time, I want you to be encouraged. When you hear that call, take it as an invitation and enjoy the time of working together with God. I'll see you next time on The Word in 10. God bless you.